Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, it's good to like catch up with friends in 3D vision and graphics community here at UPenn. I hope people can hear me clearly on the Zoom. Otherwise, like let us know. I think if you have any questions, you can also speak up in the Zoom and we'll be able to hear you, I suppose. Okay, so today I'll be just mainly talking about learning 3D fauna and flora in the wild, meaning like animals and like plants, life in general in this world. So as a kid, I was like fascinated by all these like animal videos. I'm not sure if you're like spent any hours on these. And we are living in this like dynamic world with all kinds of these animals and plants that moving around in the world that gives us a sense of life we enjoy. And humans, by looking at this world, is able to sort of like produces depictions of the world. This is probably some people would remember. This is a scene from the like famous Lion King show musical from Disney, which is it's amazing show. Like, if you haven't watched it, you should. It's the kind of like a depiction of what like the animals world, animal kingdom should be in humans' eyes, and so this is a great example of what I think the ultimate goal of computer vision or like machine learning in general. You want to be able to make sense of our experiences, perceptual experiences of the world, and to be able to communicate stories through imagination. And so now one of the most fundamental step in this process would be to recognize objects. Like what is this object here? By looking at this image, we humans seem to be able to retrieve or from our memories a set of priors related to this image, and we recognize this object as a lion, which means it should has like certain type of like shape. It should move around the world in certain like motion pattern, and or even like functionalities when we start to interact with objects in the world. And all these characteristics define what we call a lion, right? Or a chair or a person. And so this gives us a way of like factorizing the concepts into a structure representation across like different axes, like shape, material, or motion. Here, we've like in my research, I focused more on physical axes, these like shape, material, motion, etc. But there are also like semantic concepts or like more abstract concepts that we humans tend to care about as well. So another interesting aspect of this learning process is that we don't really learn only one single object, right? It's what we end up learning is a distribution over many, many instances. We don't really memorize one single instance. So all these priors we learned about the world is actually distribution over like accumulative experiences that we had in the world. So it's this is what we tend to call like object intrinsics, where it's basically these vectorized distributions over the instances that we observe in the world. And so the goal of my research has been on like try to recover these distributions from just simply raw observations, so that we can generate variations of these like visual entities. Now, in the past decade, it's like machine learning, especially like supervised learning, has taken over in the past decade in terms of like learning all these concepts, and as well as like geometric representations of objects. And one of the the most straightforward approach is to just capture data. If we want to learn all these like physical concepts of for physical properties of objects. But as you can see, like if you want to model all kinds of animals in the wild, it's kind of hard. Like it's hard to it's expensive and tedious to collect all kinds of like 3D labels of objects, and pretty much infeasible to scale to the long tail distribution of all kinds of animals in the wild. And sort of like more fundamentally, it's learns the correlations instead of like the principles that that we humans as like or the scientists would try to recover from the nature. So the hypothesis, like the setting of my research has been like trying to see if we can learn all these principles from just like raw observations without human labels in the first place. And now the lucky thing is like, yes, the giants, physicists through the hundreds of years have told us how the world should work, at least like kind of like it's there is a physical explanation of the world. There's we can simulate the image formation process to generate images, and there are like lots of symmetries and repetitions, regularities that exist in the world we can exploit to explain the world. And this is a famous quote from Isaac Newton: "Nature is pleased with simplicity, and nature is no dummy," which is like sort of a trying to say there's a symmetry and like compact representation of the world. So now with this, these like knowledge about the world, we can start to explain the observations we have. And in this like analysis by synthesis framework, where we can try to recover these underlying destructured, disentangled representations by just like explaining the observations images. And the way to give rise to these internal representations without an annotation is would be to like exploit the symmetries and regularities we know about the world. And this is like sort of the framework that I've been working on over the past few years. And so the setup is given at training time, you would see a bunch of like images or videos online, and you would try to train a model that at inference time just take a single 2D observation, a single image, and you would be able to infer the underlying 3D representations of this object, like 3D shape, motion, material, etc. All right, so to begin with, I'm gonna take you through like briefly through my like trajectories of my research in the past few years. I started my PhD on this work where we tried to reconstruct faces of without supervision, and like human faces or cat faces. And then I also look at some like vases in the museum, and then we also go to the garden, look at some flowers and reconstruct all these like generative distribution of flowers. And then eventually I think I'll focus more on the last part, where we start trying to model the dynamic objects like all these animals in the wild. So just briefly skimming through some like previous work that I've done. This work is what we did in 2020, and the goal is like, given a bunch of like single view images of these cat faces, for example, without any like human annotation or shape models, we want to reconstruct the underlying 3D shapes of these objects. And the key there was to exploit the symmetry of these objects. There is a bilateral symmetry of these instances, although you're only given one single image of each instance at training time. So the pipeline is a pretty simple framework where at training time we would just decompose this image into a bunch of representation, like viewpoint, a dominant directional light, a depth map, which represent the 3D surface, and the albedo, the intrinsic color of this object. And using a differentiable renderer, you can start inferring all these parameters by just reconstruction loss. And to like avoid degenerate solution, you would inject symmetry prior into the model by flipping the internal representations so that the model would predict a symmetric view of the object first and then rotating it to match the input image, which enables the model to disentangle shape and pose without like explicit annotations. And of course, like all these objects are not perfectly symmetric. So we had to add this confidence map mechanism, which the model would automatically learn to discount those regions that are less symmetric in the image. Okay, and these are some like brief results. After you train a model, just give it a test image at inference time, you would be able to reconstruct a 3D face from just even these abstract drawings of faces, emojis, and cartoonish images. And it's kind of cool to see like the model trained on real human faces, it captures the real like human face prior when it's like start to reason about these abstract faces. And okay, another cool thing is like one of my artist friend took this and just applied it on a bunch of like unrealistic natural faces. It's what we call like pareidotic faces. Essentially, it's just like these images in the world that in the natural world on which we subconsciously cast a humanoid interpretation. And we have a beautiful like quote here, like we call it self-portraits. These are moments we find ourselves in an unexpected encounter with another being, and they're mirrors through which we see the images of ourselves as humans. Just some fun stuff beyond this project. Okay, now next, briefly, I'll go through a few other projects that we did along this line. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like they all follow the same kind of
Yeah, so that's what the model learns. So essentially, at training time, you would just the training images are like center cropped. So we kind of assume we have a detection of faces first, and you crop the image like all these faces around the like images around the face, and that's given as training data to the model. So, but then like they're 2D images, so the model has to reason about like the underlying 3D structure of these faces. Cool. And so now the second project that I would like to briefly mention is to take the symmetry prior, but now a different kinds of symmetry, like rotational symmetry. But here what we focus on is trying to recover the surface material of these vases, like from this collection of from the Met Museum in New York. And I'm not going to go through the technical details, but just to show some results, like at training time, you only see like single view images as well. But like the model learns to decompose the albedo and shading of these vases. And at the test time, you just like given one single image and predict all these intrinsic components. And here's some like animations of the 3D renderings that you can generate, as well as like relighting results from these vases. Okay, and recently we've also, because like this inverse rendering task, it's kind of hard to evaluate, and we've seen a lot of progress in the past few years using neural representations. And recently we've been like collecting a data set to evaluate the progress of this object inverse rendering task. And we're going to present this in like next week at NeurIPS. So we've seen a lot of progress in this area, but like most of these works, they evaluate on their own data sets, and a lot of them are just using synthetic data set, which like would tend to fall short in terms of capturing the real like world illumination effects. So in this work, we try to collect a more comprehensive data set of real world objects to be able to evaluate this, all these like different inverse rendering methods. And this is what we end up like capturing. we took 14 objects and captured them in like sort of in the wild environment from multiple viewpoints in different environments with like almost 2,700, 2,800 images, HDR images, so that we can evaluate 3 tasks here. Like one is like geometric estimation, where we obtain the ground truth by scanning. And then we can also evaluate like novel scene relighting, where you recover the intrinsic materials from one scene and transfer like and try to render these recovery intrinsics from another scene and compare to the captures we took from the other scenes. And as well as like the third benchmark, it's the novel view synthesis. We just like evaluate within that single environment. And there are some more results if you like to check more details in the website. It's go stanfordorg.github.io. All right, now I'm like going through a bunch of works like pretty quickly, but I think I will focus more on the animals work in the last project. And so this another work we look at last year is these flowers. And nature, like not only animals, like all these flowers, it's interesting because each of these, if you look at this picture, like you see a lot of similar objects. Somehow we humans are able to recognize their similar patterns here. But of course, like if you compare just pixel values of these crops, they're not going to be like exactly the same. Because they're kind of like different poses and different shading, and or even like more fundamentally, like because this is a picture of many instances, and like it's easy to argue that there are no flowers that are exactly the same in the natural world. And so fundamentally, each of these instances, they're like depict a different shape and different like appearance in some like fine-grained details. And so ultimately we would need to be able to, if we want to reconstruct all these instances from just this single image, we would need to be able to like explain the variations as well as the similarities across these instances. And there's a bit of a quote as well, like from a book that I picked up a few months ago. It's from this developmental biologist in Cambridge, which studies embryo like how a human, like a human life actually stems from a single cell, basically embryology. And in the first few pages, she wrote, like the cosmos our lives are shaped by symmetry and its violations. And that's how like human life is kind of evolving through from a single cell. Okay, back to this project. So what we want to do is essentially take this one single image and develop a generative model that can explain the 3D instances in this single image, and so that we can sample from this distribution to generate like more variations of these objects. And like ultimately, it's a fairly simple framework. You kind of like pretty old idea of like using a GAN to generate 3D shapes as well as like albedo. Although the albedo is kind of rough here, we still need to work on that. But basically, you would just like learn a generative model in the latent space where you sample shape and albedo, and once you render it, you would compare with the like crops from the real image and train the model so that it matches the real distribution of these 2D crops. And here's some like results where you just have one single image and you can decompose sort of these like 3D surfaces. There is no diffusion here, so it's work done before diffusion like took the field. So but I think like from just one single image, these results are pretty cool still. Okay, finally we get to the animals. And I think it's more interesting in this space because all these animals, they're dynamic. They walk around and move around in the world. And it's really hard to capture like multi-views, simultaneous multi-views of these objects in the wild. So really, this is where like this sort of weakly supervised or unsupervised framework could shine, because you would almost like always have only like very sparse observations of these animals and to be able to reason about their motion and 3D shape jointly. So this is one of the work that we did last year. And the setting is very similar to the previous one, but now it's much more complicated. You would have like single view images of these animals. Here we like in this work we focused on one single category first. And so from these single view images, you would want to train a model that at test time, just given a single image, you would be able to infer all these articulated 3D shapes and start animating them in 3D in a feed-forward fashion. So there is no optimization in this inference process. So the key there was to distill these like correspondences from self-supervised image features. We used Dino, and the good thing about these Dino image features, although they're not trained with any labels at all, it captures, if you take the PCA of these features, this is what you obtain in the right on the right. You would see like the legs are sort of clustered into a green like color, and the body is like yellow and the head is purple. So these are correspondences that emerge from these self-supervised features. And immediately, if you see this picture, you would like start to wonder, yeah, if you have these correspondences, can you start registering them and deal with the underlying 3D, reason about the underlying 3D model and register them in the canonical space. So that's kind of what we did. Now, to briefly go through the framework. So the underlying representation is crucial in this task when you don't have explicit supervision to train these models. You would need some representation that are like efficient enough to learn from sparse observations, as well as like it should be like compact, like has the expressiveness to explain all these articulations. And to do this, we designed this like hierarchical shape representation where we start from a category-wise prior shape representation. And here we're using this DMTED representation to represent the category-wise prior shape of this horse category. So just a brief like introduction of this, how this representation work. If many of you might have known this representation, is called deep marching tetrahedra. It's kind of like similar. People have been working on like differentiable marching cubes as well, like back in the day. But this one is particularly neat, is because when you like look at tetrahedra, there are only 3 configurations where a surface could cut through a tetrahedra, and that and basically, if you model the underlying geometry using an SDF, you would be able to extract the surface by just linearly interpolating the SDF values at these vertices of the tetrahedra. And that's where it gives you it gives you the differentiable like extraction of the surface. And now the good thing about this is it preserves the underlying flexibility of the SDF, so it can model like topological changes. And at the same time, once you extract the mesh, you can also easily render it much more efficiently than the underlying implicit representation. And it's much easier to articulate with these meshes. But nowadays, like we can also use Gaussians, which it's kind of seem to show impressive results as well. All right, so at the training time, we initialize this shape as this blob. Another cue we'll give the model is that we're gonna tell them it's a quadrant. We only model quadrant paths here. So what that means is we can use a simple heuristic to define the skeleton of this object by just connecting like the farthest 2 points to the center and then initiate like 4 legs. And this is the only assumption that model uses. And gradually we'll learn to morph this like sphere into an actual shape of a horse. So the way, like, as I said, we're going to exploit these like self-supervised image features for correspondences. And we do so by learning also a canonical field of these features. And now this is a category prior, but each instance would be different. So we also need to model the instance-specific deformations from just a single image at training time. So the model will predict the appearance in terms of like in the form of a albedo field and deformation in the canonical space that matches the like geometric details of this instance. And from the bones that were initiated on the canonical shape, the model also predicts the rotations of each bone and apply the skinning onto this mesh to like pose this instance. And also it models the dominant directional light so that we can like render the shading of the object as well. Now the like important part of this pipeline is to reason about like the viewpoint, which is always like the first step in if you don't have any like 3D cues to learn from. And the problem that like viewpoint is hard is because there are lots of local minima. Like you can see this image, if you only look at like this object, especially the silhouette of this object, there are many, especially the 4 like different configurations that would lead to the very similar projection of these objects due to like symmetry and also like front and back projection. So now the way we tackle this is by sampling multiple hypotheses. So basically we would ask the model to predict 4 hypotheses across like viewpoint hypothesis across 4 quadrants. And the model would predict 4 rotations at the same time, and each one would associate with a probability value. And at training time, we would just like sample 1 hypothesis, evaluate the loss, and train the model. So we don't really densely sample the 4 hypotheses and render them at the same time. And it's kind of like a neat, efficient mechanism to be able to reason about multiple hypotheses in the viewpoint space. Yeah. Right. Oh, so right, the skinning weight, it's defined by heuristic, like it's a distance, inverse distance to the bone. So each vertex on the mesh, you would compute the distances, vertical distances to the bones, and that defines the skinning weight. Like you take the inverse and take the exponential, that gives you the invert the weights to the bone. But yeah, I think we can also like start learning more fine-grained skinning weights, skinning models of these objects. But this is like the first implementation of this.
Yeah, and another question was how you use the dynamo.
Oh, right. Yes. So now, once you have these instance-specific deformations and predictions, you would render the RGB loss, the RGB image, and also render this dino feature. So this dino feature is it's a feature field, but now the way to render this field is you would take this deformed shape and then sample the surface, the vertices. Well, we call it like deferred neural rendering. Basically, exactly. So the dino is represented as a field, but the shape is represented as a mesh. You would render the mesh, rasterize the mesh onto the image. Exactly, and then you query the field at the surface locations of this mesh. No, it does not. So Dino feature, it's cool that it captures the yeah, it captures like semantic correspondences, but it doesn't really give you geometric correspondence. Like it doesn't differentiate between different legs. It's like part level correspondences. So and that's why also in many of these results, which I'm going to show now, the model doesn't really differentiate like left and right legs. Some of these cases confuses the left and right leg. I'm not sure if there's any example here, but if you look at the website, you'll find like tons of confusions. And so at test time, this is what the model can do. Like just take a single image, and then you would infer the underlying articulated 3D shape. And you can also apply it on like drawings and cartoon images or artifacts. And you can like apply these animations onto these 3D shapes and start animating them. Although they're not fine-grained enough though. And this is like a 3D printed horse that we took from the teaser of our paper. All right, so that's the first work on, well, like sort of the second work on animals. But as I said, like all these animals are dynamic. They're moving around the world, right? And different animals has like different motion patterns. And so this is actually the first video in history is this video like taken from a horse, like of a horse running through a field by Edward Mulbridge, where essentially it's captured by a series of cameras lined up across the field. And you just concatenate like all these frames together to generate these animation. Now, what I want to point out is like these animals, they're dynamic and they have like move around the world and have motion. So the immediate follow-up question is like, can we actually also model the temporal like priors of these motion patterns, like instead of one single snapshot of the 3D shape, but actually modeling the 3D motion patterns. And so this is a follow-up work, where instead of training on images, we're trained on videos. And what you would do is just take a video clip and instead of reconstructing individual images, we would encode this entire sequence of frames into latent code, which decodes a sequence of like articulated poses. And similar to what we did previously, we also have this single image reconstruction, 3D reconstruction module. And when you apply these poses onto the 3D shape, you would be able to generate the entire sequence of like frames decoded from this motion latent VAE space. And we train the pipeline using the same framework, where it's using only like dino features and image and mask without any pose annotations. So now what's cool about this is once you have this latent space, you can now like sampling different motions, and from this motion space, you can sample like different motion sequences to generate these diverse motions. It's trained on a relatively small data set of YouTube videos that it's but we're looking forward to scaling it up as well. But this is some like preliminary results you can see by just sampling the latent space of motion, and you can apply these generative motion onto a reconstruction of a horse instance from a single image. And more recently, we've been working on this like generating like diverse animal instances. We had this recent work called like learning the 3D fauna of the web. It's done by two visiting students in Stanford, and it's a collaboration with like other institutions at Oxford as well. And so if we look at these, so the goal of this project is like instead of modeling only one single category of horses, we would like to actually model a diverse like animals with the same like with a joint model. And here we focus on quadruped animals. So basically all these animals will share a similar skeleton, like quadrupedal skeleton, although the shape, the geometry, surface, like it's pretty different. So like a similar framework where, but now since we want to expand this model to like cover more like object categories, and we don't want to like the model to, we don't want to tell the model what the object is, what the animal is before like starting to predict all these properties. So what we end up doing is we reuse the dino as a semantic descriptor of the object, of the animal. So we like use the frozen network image encoder from Dino, extract the feature, and train this memory bank where since these Dino features, they capture the semantic of this, it sort of like captures what this object is and has like this, when we take like the Dino feature of a horse and a zebra, they're much closer than the feature of a horse and a fox, for example. So we use this structure, similarity structure, and train this memory bank by optimizing a set of keys and values. And so what this memory bank would end up producing is it preserves this similarity structure and outputs a vector that captures the shapes of different animals in just like without any category labels or annotations. And with that, it's apply the same framework, and you can scale it up to like capture more categories automatically without even knowing the category label of these animals or like template shapes. And this is what the most latest results, where you would the model would like just take in this animals image of these different animals without knowing what they are, giving it like without giving them a hard-coded category label. Here's some more results. And in general, it works pretty well on these quadruped animals, but still, like if we want to scale up to all kinds of animals with different like motion skeletons, it's got to be difficult. And since it is like memory bank, it's smooth, and we can start interpolating between different instances from like one single instance. You can smoothly interpolate into a different animal's shape. And, or you can also sample from the semantic like memory bank to generate these diverse interpolations of the base shape. All right, so far that's what I've been up to, and reconstructing these like animals and flowers. And recently, I've been working on a few like ongoing projects that are like trying to expand this landscape a little bit. Now here's where I need to play some audio. So I'm gonna show you this video again, and there's like narration to the video, which I find pretty interesting when I was watching it.
The only thing lacking was the sound of the hooves pounding the ground.
Okay, let's see.
The only thing lacking was the sound of the hooves pounding the ground, or they would have believed that horses were really running through the room.
So I think, you know, modeling all these objects, it's cool, like visual representation of these objects, but also our experiences, like our understanding of the world goes like far beyond vision, right? It's we understand, associate our visual world with like other modalities like sound, audio, as well as other like smell or even like taste. When you see a lemon, you like your mouth starts to water, for example. And like this is a very cool results from Dynabar at ICCV 2023. We can now synthesize like all these dynamic scenes from different viewpoints, But what I find really like lacking is like a world without sound is kind of like a story never told. So it would be super cool if we can start capturing the acoustic aspect of these scenes, dynamic scenes, because when the scenes start moving, like there must be sound, like there must be physics going around.
In order to
So this is a
create
new project
immersive
that we're,
virtual replicas of real
I'll
scenes,
just let it
we
play.
must capture the auditory aspects of the scene as well as the visual ones. Thus, we present Hearing Anything Anywhere, a method for capturing and virtualizing real acoustic spaces. We start with a real-world scene with a sound source of unknown position and orientation. Our goal is to capture the intrinsic acoustic properties of the scene in a way that allows us to simulate any sound signal being played from the sound source and to listen to it at any location, hence the name Hearing Anything Anywhere.
So just to give you a demo, like this is we're gonna spatialize this audio. This is a source audio play. And we're gonna synthesize this audio being played in this space, in this like highly reverberant corridor.
To get back home.
You can sort of like
Now,
get that.
here is a video trajectory through the room where the audio is rendered using our model.
Once there was a way.
I'm not sure how the spatial
To get
audio works here,
back home.
but you can sort of like hear the like reverberant effect of these like narrow
Once
corridors.
there was a way. To get back home. Sleep, pretty darling.
Okay,
Once
this is
there was
probably
a
a
way.
more interesting scene where it's captured but in this like acoustically dampened room. So you can see we have these panels that are set up across the wall, which absorbs a lot of reverberation of the scene. And what we can then simulate is this effect of it's going to be more like obvious when you start walking away from the speaker towards the wall. The sound it here is much like more silent, and it gives like more spatial variation.
Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way to get back home. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry. And I will sing a lullaby. Golden slumbers fill your eyes.
And it's binaural actually, but maybe there's no binaural effect in these speakers. We're gonna release this work pretty soon, so it's
Once there
like if we put it on your headphones, you would hear the spatial effect of these audio being played in the space. A brief like explanation of how the model works is basically we're taking this like inverse rendering pipeline, but now we're rendering audio instead of like visual effects. And in audio, there are a few like key properties that audio differentiate from vision. And so like, but an overview of the framework would be just we trace the acoustic waves from the speaker and bounces off the walls and trace these like reflection paths until they reach the microphone. So now what makes this task different from vision is that like from vision, when you take a picture, you capture like, there are millions of sensors, like you capture millions of pixels from just one single photo. Whereas like for audio, for each microphone, you only sort of capture the entire like acoustic signal into like one single point, sort of observing the world, the space with one single pixel. But what's special about this audio is that like sound travels much slower than light. What that means is this like audio signal, acoustic signal would arrive at the microphone at different times in the space. So what that means is we can now start attributing the acoustic contributions of each of the signals back to the reflection paths. When the sound bounces across several walls, it's going to be arrive much later than a direct path from the speaker to the audio, from the speaker to the microphone. So with this time like of arrival information, we can start reasoning about like the reflection paths and the contribution of each path, and inversely reason about the acoustic coefficients of the scene. And so I'm just gonna skip a bunch of like details of this framework, but it's basically capturing the environment with a bunch of planar geometry, with a bunch of planes, and then you start doing like path tracing from the speaker to the microphone. And we only capture the room with like 12 microphones, and then you can like sparsely, and then you can densely interpolate with these 12 locations. One thing that I like to highlight is we've set up this like audio capture system and capture these 4 different rooms very densely with like 500 microphone locations within these space, so that we can like evaluate the performance of these audio synthesis quality. And cool. And finally, I think another work that I would like to briefly share is this recent work on like visual concept learning, where you have so now the task is going beyond like physical space. What we're really interested is by like just looking at a bunch of like training data, if we can learn to infer the like concept from these. So at inference time, what we really want to achieve is, given a single image, you want to infer a bunch of concept axes from this image. What the category of this object is, what the color of this object is, what the material of it is. And so what the model would do is just train a bunch of encoders. Each specific encoder would take care of a concept axis and produce an embedding across like along this axis. And with these decoded, like disentangled embeddings, you can then start recomposing them to generate like new variations of these concepts. And so here, what we're exploiting is like all these diffusion models, and just train this framework with a similar like reconstruction framework, but now instead of using a like graphical renderer, we now uses like these diffusion models, image generation models as a rendering engine. And so here are a few like encoders that we would train with the model, like category, color, material, or more like we have more examples as well, like style. The framework is pretty simple. Like you would convert this image into these embeddings and put them into a text template, and feed this text template to the image generation model, and optimize and train these encoders with like the diffusion loss, similar to a reconstruction loss, essentially. And to guide this embeddings to produce like meaningful like embedding, we also utilize a like question engine and Q&A model, which explicitly asks like what the object is and what the color is and what material is, and guide these embeddings to stay close to the text embeddings. And so this produces much more like disentangled representations. And so we can now, with these disentangled representations, we can now decompose like any image in a feed-forward manner without optimization into like category, color, for example, on these like fruit data sets, and recompose them to generate different variations of these objects. And also, like, we can also evaluate this, just take a real image, feed it into the model, and produce a set of like compositions, like generate a chair concept in different color or different materials, for example. And we're going to release this work soon as well. You can check the website if you like. Okay, I think it's pretty much time now. So to summarize a little bit, like this is sort of my vision. Ultimately, we want to just look at a bunch of like raw simulations and to recover these physically grounded structural representation of the world so that we can like, generate a new like imagination of like communicate our understanding, our stories from the world. And ultimately, it's not like just single modality. It's not just only visual, right? It's our understanding of the world. Has like sound, has even other modalities. Although it's really hard to model like smell or taste at this point. But I'm sure in the future we're going to incorporate more and more modalities into this learning pipeline. And so that we not only can generate like videos or render like videos, but also can maybe compose music at some point or like write books. And I would like to conclude with this quote from Hilma af Klint. It goes, "Those granted with a gift of seeing more deeply can see beyond form and concentrate on wondrous aspects hiding behind every form, which is called life." And that's the ultimate vision of my work. And with that, I would like to thank my collaborators and a bunch of amazing students there who are applying for PhD. If you if you bump into them at some point. All right, thank you so much. If any questions, we can happy to discuss.
I have one question.
Yes.
It's very interesting for the sound and for the animals.
Okay.
For the animals, I also have this question on the human.
Yeah.
Like there is one way we treat the reconstruction from like the single view or image as purely like learning from real data. But usually I heard a voice that we don't need to really use all of these kind of cross images, cross videos, and we learn some patterns over the real image now. We can use just maybe for example single view, and then coming like an image-based diffusion, the 1, 2, 3, or like the bunch of like 1, 2, 3, 4 things,
right?
And do the reconstruction of the animals,
right?
What do you think is a better way to like, if, let's say I want to generate that shape and all the appearance from a single image of any animals,
right?
Which is better? Okay,
I think diffusion, the path with like distilling 2D diffusion into 3D representation is taking off, and it provides like very promising results. And I'm also excited about like leveraging large scale 2D priors, and which in terms of like which approach would be better or like lead to better results at the end. I think ultimately it should be the similar goal, just taking a bunch of like 2D images and train and learn some priors, and you can like distill the underlying 3D representation. But I think what's kind of missing at this point is start modeling the dynamics of these objects. But I'm sure like many people are working on it. If you can, so the pain with these diffusion models, distilling like 3D distillation from diffusion model at this point, I think is that you only distill one single instance, or pretty much it's hard to distill a canonical model of it's hard to align different instances on the canonical space. What that means would be you would need to understand what how this horse correspond to another horse, how this, or even how this horse correspond to like other objects, like a car, a human. And this sort of semantic correspondences would allow you to animate and control like your generation is, instead of like just optimizing one single 3D instance. But what you ultimately would like to capture is also to be able to control, generate the instance in a controlled manner, like generate different motions and control different aspect of the appearance, for example. But I think, yeah, two paths could converge at some point, where ultimately, ultimately, I think it's the same objective. I want to distill knowledge from 2D observations, either through reconstruction or by just like distillation. But distillation, in some sense, is also reconstruction of the data distribution, right?
How much more information is on all this would you get if you just had like another image of you worked on all the
right. Right. That helps a lot. Like from single image versus if you start have another view of the object, it helps a lot because like especially if you have like static scene, if you have another viewpoint, you can start triangulate the correspondences, and that is where 3D like arrives from. But ultimately, the world is there is no static image. The reason that we can capture different viewpoint is because sort of light is very fast. It's much faster than the speed we can capture them. What that means is the light field stabilizes like the second we take the image. Otherwise, if you walk around, if you imagine like the light travels like sound, it would always be in this like evolving environment where you would never capture my audio from one point to another. Right. So in that respect, because like time only travels forward, and at some point, if you can set up like multiple cameras, of course, like I feel like at some yeah. Oh, but if you're thinking about like only those micro motions of the camera, it's really hard to capture any like significant 3D information from a very small baseline. Right. But yes, so from this like very small motion parallax information, you can so the reason the depth, like you can give you like rough depth of the scene, but
you still need to find all the other distribution.
Right. And not only single image though, if you're talking about like other modality like audio or so ultimately it's just like our understanding of the world, it's event like fundamentally multimodality and multimodal, and we can associate our visual understanding with other like other axes, other modalities, and somehow our brain is very efficient at processing different information, and I think that's what excites me and also like many people in the field. How can you derive representations that not only specific to reason about a certain type of object, like not only 3D, not only appearance, but also reason about their motion, their or even like the underlying physical process, like how they make sound. Or I think these are, we're still very far from like what we have in vision.
Go back
Yes.
Yeah, this one, rather than like recompose a new image from the input image, you like just get a more physical properties of the single image. Like you can get the geometry and also get the line input from the single input image, so you can render it at different viewpoints and different lines.
Right. So that would be super cool. So right now the framework it's designed to capture a coarse like abstract concept like of what this object is instead of fitting specifically to this particular instance. So what that means is from this embedding you would generate different like versions of the function. Right. 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 So you can what you can do is you can do like a bunch of people are working on personalization where you can optimize this latent this embedding particularly to fit this image, and that can sort of capture a description of this particular object instance in the image. But that requires optimization usually. And yes, at the end of the day, it's kind of like two different paths where in this work, it's more learning this generative abstract concepts. And the other like work that I've been working on is in recovering the exact physical properties of the object. And both are really cool. Like our brain sort of work in a more abstract manner. Like we can't really like recover exact physical properties of the object. Like we don't really predict depth or reconstruct 3D in our brain, but we learn all these like abstract concepts internally somehow. And so I think it has like it's useful in different cases. Like if you want to deploy robots in the real world, you probably need to be more accurate than what humans are able to be like more efficient than us. All right.
I saw your previous work on the capture for evidence for animation. So is it possible we inject some visual moves like physical simulation into this process? Yes. Like to give some differential simulation, and so we can apply it by small basically physically.
Right. For sure. That's something that I really wanted to work on, but like working on physics is hard. Like for me, but it's about like physical representation. Like it's a lot of these physical like physics engine. It's involves a lot of hacks. These hacks makes it not differentiable. Like what that means is like the parameter space would be like always like too complicated to just regress from raw observations without dense supervision. So if you have dense captures of the object moving around, then you probably can infer those parameters pretty easily. But if you're working on this like very under constrained setting where you have only single observation, without even knowing where the ground is or the geometry of the ground plane, or like it becomes really hard to infer a over-parameterized representation. But I'm sure like this is something that one of the like most difficult like question in task in the field at the moment. Cool. With that, I think we can probably end the session today.